Here's the Prime Minister, Saad Hariri. Let's listen in.
13 days ago, the Lebanese people have been waiting for a political solution that put an end to the deteriorating situation. Throughout this period, have been trying to find an exit through which we can listen to people's voices and steer our country away from any political, economical, or any other threats. Today, with all regret, we have reached a deadlock, and we need a shock in order to break through the crisis. I'm heading to the presidential palace to render down the resignation of the government to His Excellency President Michel Aoun and to the Lebanese people wherever they are. This is in response to the will and demand of thousands of Lebanese who took to the streets demanding change. It is based on our duty to provide a network, and let's say a safety net, to protect the entire country from plunging into mayhem. I call on all the Lebanese to give precedence and priority to Lebanon's stability, unity, and civil peace, and to steer the country away from the economic crunch. And to our political partners, I say it is our duty today together to safeguard Lebanon and to steer it away from any perils. It is our duty to bring our economy back on its feet in a genuine stance that we shouldn't be wasted. I will render my resignation, and I will place it under the disposal of the President and all the Lebanese. Offices come and go. However, our country must live on intact. No one is above Lebanon. May God save Lebanon. May Lebanon live on.
A very short statement there from Prime Minister Saad Hariri in Lebanon. He said that he was on his way to the presidential palace to tender the resignation of the government and his own resignation. Do we have Zaina Hoda back with us? Yes, Zaina Hoda is out on the streets of Beirut. Zaina, first of all, before we get to the reaction, what the likely reaction to that is going to be, what are we to make of what Saad Hariri has just done?
Well, he has resigned. It was a demand by the protesters. They wanted the government to resign, the ruling elite to be replaced by technocrats who don't have any political affiliation in order to carry out much-needed economic reform. So he is heeding the demand of those who were in the streets. Now, what this means, there's a political crisis in the country, a vacuum, now that he has resigned. What is going to happen next? He blamed his partners yet again, because this is the second time he addressed the nation since the protest movement began 13 days ago. The first time he blamed his partners in the government for not allowing him or obstructing his work. He wasn't able to carry out reforms. And he gave them 3 days, 72 hours to try to come up with a solution. They came up with an economic reform package, but it wasn't enough for the people on the ground. Now, he says, I was trying to find an exit to the crisis, and what is needed is a shock. There is no doubt. The Prime Minister resigning is a shock. Trying to find an exit to the crisis. He has been holding talks with ministers representing the different parties over the past few days. His partners in government, yes, he calls them partners, but he is not a member of the ruling alliance. He is in the opposition. It's a very complicated picture, but one has to mention this. Those who are in control of government, those who are in control of parliament, is an alliance that is made up of the president, the House Speaker, and Hezbollah. They control the government and parliament, but they need him. They need Saad al-Hariri. He is the main Sunni leader in this country, and this is a country where the political system is based on sectarianism. So the main Sunni leader of the country resigning means a whole community has now been sidelined, and I think this is what Hariri is betting on, hoping that this will put pressure on his quote-unquote partners to compromise, to find a consensus, to come up with a government that will be acceptable to people on the streets. Because at the end of the day, The Hezbollah-led alliance needs Hariri. He gives them political cover. The international community supports him. If they appoint a prime minister who is allied to them, there is a very big chance that the Lebanese government will not gain the legitimacy in the international community. Already the United States has been imposing sanctions on a main player in the government, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. So if this government becomes purely a Hezbollah-backed led government, then Lebanon as a country could be sanctioned by the US. So he knows this. These are the cards that Saad Hariri has in his hands. He's playing them. Maybe it is a negotiating tactic. But right now, his decision is to side with the protesters in the streets.
All right, Zainab, for the moment, many thanks indeed. Let's go elsewhere in the city. Al Jazeera's Stephanie Decker is in Beirut. Stephanie, you can't see the pictures that we're showing our viewers at the moment. Scenes of what can only be described as a celebration after the violent scenes we saw earlier in the day. Protesters pretty happy. They've got what they wanted. The government is no more. Does that mean an end to the protests? What happens next?
I think it's very early days. We are outside the residence of the Prime Minister. You saw earlier things in this country can change in a second. We saw the violence of supporters of two of the main groups, as you heard Zainab report there. He's now tendered his resignation. We have had warnings as well of a power vacuum in this country. What happens now? Well, the political parties in parliament will need to head for consultations with the president. This can take time. Then a name needs to be decided. Of course, it needs to be a Sunni leader according to the constitution. This again can take time. And then they need to form a cabinet, whoever that person is. So you are heading into times of uncertainty here. So there may be celebrations, but as people will tell you, there are many different parties that have many different interests on the ground. This is a country that is incredibly well armed. You have parties that have militias attached to them. The population in general, the majority of them have weapons at home. It is a concern. I mean, just earlier before this speech happened, we saw people in our building leaving their offices early, going home. Of course, there's a question mark. People are nervous as to how this is going to play out. They haven't been here before in terms of this exact way. Of course, Lebanon has had political crises before. It's had no government before. It's had no real leader before. But now the people, yes, they said they wanted the entire government to resign. I think it is a welcome first step, of course, because as you heard from the Prime Minister there, he was directly addressing the people, saying this is a response to what you wanted. And he also then turned to his political partners. We know that there's been bickering between the sides, not agreeing as to what he wanted, saying that it is our duty to safeguard Lebanon. So again, I think it's too early days to predict. Everyone we've been speaking to over the last almost 2 weeks now will tell you it's very difficult to predict how things are going to go on. People would say they didn't see a resignation of the government. That has now happened. Uncertain times in Lebanon, they can be dangerous times, as you saw on the streets earlier today. Things changed in a second. Supporters of those two main movements, the Amal movement and Hezbollah, clashed with protesters, moved on to Martyrs Square, started slashing down the tents. Police came in a little late to try and disperse them. So anything is possible. These are uncertain times now. Let's wait and see how things are going to play out. Yes, people are celebrating, but I think certainly too early days for any kind of jubilation. There are major challenges ahead.
One thing you haven't mentioned, Stephanie, is whether there will have to be an election now. I mean, the government has essentially collapsed. The Prime Minister is going to President Aoun to tender his resignation and that of the government. You say that the President will now encourage the various parties to try to form another government.
Yes, elections is something that the protesters want. What the protesters' demands are that there is an interim government cabinet made up of technocrats, individuals who are not linked to any of the political parties. Of course, the protesters have been calling also for a change to the political system here, a political system that has been ingrained here for decades. These are huge challenges, huge asks. So what they want is of a interim government of technocrats, independent people, until new elections are going to be called. Is that going to happen? we don't know. Certainly at the moment, we heard from the Prime Minister he's heading to the palace to tender his resignation to the President. Then we're going to have to wait and see what is going to happen next, whether those demands are going to be addressed or whether, and again, this is going to take time. We're talking weeks and weeks down the line, potentially. This is not going to have an answer tomorrow. What is going to happen on the streets? Earlier today, we were hearing reports that the protesters were going to regain their momentum in response to those counter-protests that we saw earlier today and returning to the streets. I think at the moment, everything is still up in the air as to how this is going to play out. Of course, the protesters are welcoming this, but because of the political dynamics in this country, they are incredibly complicated. They are not only internal, they are linked to the entire region. They are linked to Saudi Arabia, they are linked to Iran, they are linked to other countries. It is an incredibly complex web of allegiances that play each other out. So there are positions of power in play that do not want to lose those kinds of positions that they have achieved over time. So big question marks. This is a country that can be very volatile. So I think too early to be able to predict anything at this point in time, but certainly a demand of the protesters. One, government resign. We've now seen that happen. Two, transitional government of independent technocrats. Is that going to happen? And three, early elections. I think we're going to have to wait and see. Time will tell how things are going to play out here.
Al Jazeera, Stephanie Decker, live there in Beirut. That news once again. Lebanon's Prime Minister Saad Hariri says he's reached a dead end and will submit his resignation to the President. This is him speaking just a few moments ago.